You know how people say love makes you blind? Looking back, I wasn't just blind. I was practically walking through life with a bag over my head. When I met Dylan, I thought he was different. He was charming, witty, and had this underdog energy. That made me root for him. We met while working at Starbucks. Him, a 30-year-old struggling with student loans, and me, a 22-year-old college student saving up to escape my parents' never-ending gambling debt. We bonded over our hardships. Over cheap instant noodles and coffee we didn't have to pay for, we would dream about the future, how one day we'd both be successful, happy, free. 2 years later, I had taken my first step toward that future. I had a steady corporate job and had finally saved enough to move into my own apartment. Dylan? Not so much. He was still buried under his loans, still stuck in the same rut. I felt bad for him. I loved him. So, I did what I thought was the right thing to do. I invited him to move in with me. He hesitated at first, mumbling something about not being able to afford rent. But I assured him we'd figure it out together. I'd cover 80% of the rent, and he'd only have to pitch in 20%. It seemed fair at the time. That's how it started. At first, it felt like we were a team. I took care of the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry. I didn't mind. Dylan had a tough job that kept him on his feet all day. The least I could do was make home a little easier for him. Then something changed. Dylan would come home, toss his shoes off, and sink into the couch with a beer in one hand and the remote in the other. Meanwhile, I was running myself ragged, working full-time, managing the household, doing everything, and the trash. Oh, that was his one job. One simple task. But every morning I'd wake up to find the garbage still sitting there untouched, I reminded him. Again, and again, and again. I forgot, he'd say, waving me off. I should have seen it then. The lack of appreciation. The entitlement. But I didn't. Not yet. Then came the weekend that changed everything. I came home after an exhausting day, ready to relax, only to find our apartment looked like a crime scene, empty food containers, crumpled chocolate wrappers, dirty dishes stacked like a game of Jenga, the trash, still overflowing. I wanted to scream. Instead, I cleaned. For hours. Not because I wanted to, but because I had to. Because if I didn't, no one else would. When Dylan finally came home that night, he greeted me with a lazy smile and went straight to watching his game. He didn't even notice. That was the moment I snapped. I wasn't his maid, I wasn't his mother, and I sure as hell wasn't going to be his doormat anymore. The next morning, Dylan sauntered into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "Babe, what's for breakfast?" I turned to look at him, deadpan. "If you want to eat," I said flatly, "make it yourself." He blinked, confused. "What's with the attitude? That, was it?" I exploded. I called him out on everything. How I worked just as much as he did, but still had to clean up after him like a damn maid. How I had supported him financially, emotionally, physically, only to be treated like a convenience. Dylan scoffed. "I never asked you to do any of that." Oh, that was the moment. The exact second I realized that Dylan wasn't just inconsiderate. He was using me. I squared my shoulders. "Then, starting today, I'm done. You cook your own meals, wash your own clothes, and pay half the rent, or move out." His jaw dropped. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I'm dead serious." Dylan sulked. He threw a tantrum. But I didn't. Cave. And just like that, his comfortable little life started crumbling. Then one night he came home drunk. "I need to tell you something," he slurred. I sighed. "Can this wait till morning?" "No, it's important." And then, with a sloppy grin, he said the words that would change everything. "I met someone. I didn't even flinch. Her name is Bella. She's amazing. She's a real woman, not like you." I stared at him. "Real woman?" Dylan kept rambling. How Bella was rich, how she came from an elite family, how he was finally going to live the life he deserved. I let him finish. Then calmly, I said, "Then we're done. Move out." His face twisted. "You don't even care?" "No, Dylan, I don't." 2 months later, a fancy invitation arrived in the mail. Dylan and Bella were getting married, and guess what? He had invited me, but not out of kindness. Scrawled in the corner was a message just for me. "I want you to see the grand life I'm going to have with Bella." Oh, he wanted to show off. I clenched the invitation, anger bubbling under my skin. Then an idea formed. If Dylan wanted to be petty, so could I. I grabbed my laptop and started searching. Bella's social media was easy to find, and buried in her old photos was exactly what I needed, her ex-boyfriend, Jake. And that's how I found the perfect +1. Walking into that wedding with Jake on my arm was the kind of petty satisfaction I didn't know I needed. The venue was grand, the kind of place where even breathing the air felt expensive. Crystal chandeliers glittered above us, and gold-trimmed tables were lined with lavish floral arrangements. The guests were dressed to impress, sipping champagne and murmuring about how perfect Dylan and Bella were for each other. And then, we arrived. I could feel eyes turning toward us the moment we stepped through the grand doors. A hush rippled through the room as whispers began to spread. Jake and I walked in slowly, confidently. I caught sight of Dylan standing near the altar, chatting with guests. When his gaze landed on us, his smug expression evaporated. His face paled, his lips parted in shock, and for the first time ever, Dylan looked nervous. He knew exactly who Jake was. Bella, who had been across the room talking to some distant relative, suddenly froze mid-sentence when she saw Jake. Her eyes widened. She turned to me, then back to Jake, her face draining of color. I could tell she was panicking. Jake leaned toward me slightly and whispered, "She looks like she just saw a ghost." I smirked. Good. Ignoring Dylan's increasingly furious stare, we found our seats as if nothing was wrong. We sipped our drinks, chatted casually, and just like that, the tension in the room became thick enough to cut with a knife. Dylan stormed toward me, his jaw tight. He leaned down, hissing through clenched teeth. "Why the hell are you here with him?" I tilted my head innocently. "Why wouldn't I be? You invited me, remember?" His fists clenched at his sides, but he couldn't cause a scene, not with all the eyes on us. I could tell he wanted to say more, but the music started playing. The ceremony was about to begin. With no other choice, Dylan gritted his teeth and stomped back to the altar, shooting daggers at me. Everyone stood as the bride walked in. Bella, in a stunning white gown, floated down the aisle like something out of a fairy tale. Her father walked beside her, beaming with pride. But Bella? She wasn't smiling. Her eyes kept darting toward Jake. Her fingers trembled against the bouquet. I almost felt bad. Almost. The ceremony continued, and when it was time for the vows, Dylan turned to Bella with so much pride and arrogance in his expression that I nearly laughed. He really thought he had won. Then came Bella's turn to speak, and that's when I saw it, the hesitation, the flicker of doubt in her eyes. She swallowed hard, glancing toward Jake, then back at Dylan. Her hands shook. The silence stretched. The audience started shifting uncomfortably. People whispered. Then Bella dropped her bouquet. A gasp rippled through the crowd. She took one step back, then another. Then, before anyone could react, she turned and ran, right past Dylan, right past the officiant, and straight into Jake's arms. The entire room erupted. Gasps, shocked murmurs. Someone even dropped their champagne glass, the sound shattering through the stunned silence. I watched as Bella clung to Jake, her face pressed into his chest. And Dylan? He stood frozen at the altar, eyes wide, face pale. For the first time in his entire life, he had nothing to say. Bella's father looked like he was about to explode. The officiant stammered, does anyone else feel like saying I object at this point is unnecessary? A few nervous laughs rippled through the room. And me? I just sat back and sipped my drink. Dylan turned his head toward me, rage burning in his eyes. This wasn't just a ruined wedding. This was his downfall, everything he had planned, his future of luxury, the cushy life he thought he'd have with Bella. Gone. And it was. His own damn fault later that night. Hours after the wedding disaster, I was home, relaxed, enjoying some wine when I heard pounding on my front door. I sighed, already knowing who it was. I opened the door slightly, and sure enough, there stood Dylan. His face was red with fury. His hair disheveled, his tie hanging loose. "You ruined my life," he screamed. I leaned against the doorframe, raising an eyebrow. "Did I?" I said coolly. "Or did you do that all on your own?" He ran a shaky hand through his hair, his breathing ragged. "I had it all planned," he ranted. "Bella was supposed to change. My life. I was finally going to be free from all this financial crap, and now—" I let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, Dylan," I said, shaking my head. "You were never looking for love. You were looking for a paycheck." He glared at me, chest rising and falling. "Rapidly! Why would you do this?" he hissed. "Why bring him? Why ruin everything?" I tilted my head. "Funny. You invited me to your wedding just to show off, but the moment the tables turned, suddenly I'm the bad guy." His face twisted in frustration. "You don't get it. Bella was my shot at a better life." I stared at him, my voice turning. "Ice cold. You mean she was your next meal ticket?" Silence. For the first time, Dylan couldn't deny it. I crossed my arms. "You should go, Dylan. There's nothing left for you here." His jaw tightened, his last shred of pride barely holding him together. "You'll regret this," he muttered. "You'll see." Then he turned and stormed off into the night. Days passed. Then weeks. Dylan never tried to contact me again. From what I heard, he struggled to find a new job, having already quit the one he had, expecting to live off Bella's wealth. With no money and no one to mooch off of, he had to move back in with his parents. Bella and Jake? They were still together. I didn't keep in touch, but from what I saw on social media, they seemed happy. And me? I was free. For the first time in years, my life was mine. No baggage, no emotional labor, just me, my career, my future. And if I ever needed a reminder of how far I'd come, all I had to do was think of Dylan, standing alone at that altar, looking like the biggest fool in the world. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.